Hey, it is Any Old Gamer, and we're here today to talk about Dragon's B10. Now, first off, I want to point out the rank behind me, 180, that is actually the rank that was done with the farming team that we're going to be talking about first in this video. Now, we're going to be talking about a few different teams. The first team is going to be somewhat of an endgamers team. It uses a Fat Julie. The second team is somewhat of a late mid-gamers team, and then we'll talk also at the end about some options for mid-game teams that either don't have Julie or can't quite build a Fat Julie. We're not going to be doing any early game or beginner teams in this video though. Okay, so just to point out real quick on this rank 180, most of the top ranks, these are teams that were built just for the purpose of actually putting up a rank and are not teams that could be used for consistent farming. So the team we're going to be talking about today, the Fat Julie team, is actually a consistent farming team. Okay, so behind you, you can see the team. Now, we're using a Fat Julie here, which means she can clear the waves in one shot. Now, a lot of you have probably seen my original DB10 video, which used, like, I guess we could call her an overweight Julie, but not a Fat Julie. So that team had a much lower rune requirement because the Julie didn't have to clear the waves. And it ran anywhere from about 25 to 37 seconds. The overall average was probably about 31 seconds. Now, the team that we have right here running behind us, there are actually two versions of this team that you can use. The one I'm using right now is the one that has the potential to put out faster times, but it has more derp potential. The alternative to this team would be to use a Shaina, which will be more consistent times, but not quite as fast on the top end, but it also doesn't derp as much. And here's the reason why. The Sabrina skill 1 defense break is not 100%. So when Sabrina misses a defense break on the mid boss or on the end boss, especially on the end boss, you have the potential for the run to go much longer because we're not putting out enough damage. Now, I've done my best to mitigate this by bringing in the Rauk and the second Talia. So in effect, what we're doing, Rauk is a defense breaker. Both Talias, when they go, bring Sabrina along with them, plus Sabrina goes on her own. So we have 4 opportunities to trigger that skill 1 defense break from the Sabrina. However, if Sabrina doesn't defense break on her own turn, we're not going to put out enough damage, as you can see behind, in order to clear the boss in one shot. So the extra defense break opportunities are what allow us to pretty much still clear the boss even when we have a bad run like what we just had behind us. But we clear the boss at a much slower rate. That one, 38 seconds, is about as bad as these runs get. They'll get out to 42 seconds on a really bad run. But generally speaking, I've run this team for 2 days before I did this video just to make sure it was stable. Call it 1,000 runs. In 1,000 runs, I've had 1 fail, and the 40-second runs come once every 50 to 100 runs or so. Now, the team actually runs on average between 20 and 30 seconds, so I'd say the overall average is about 25. When RNG is going against you, you'll get a stretch of runs. Like right now, it looks like the RNG is against us. You get a stretch of runs that'll go around 30 seconds. When the RNG is with you, you get a stretch of runs that go 20-21 seconds. Now, the alternative to this is to bring in Shaina instead of a second Talia. When you bring in the Shaina, who would actually act second, that gives you a much more reliable defense break. With that consistent defense break, you don't have those derps. That team pretty much will never go over like 32 seconds, but you don't have enough damage to drop the boss without it getting immunity up. So that team will also pretty much never go under about 23 seconds. Overall average, probably about 27. So that team tends to be slightly slower, but it's probably never going to fail at all, where this team, as I said, it failed once in, call it 1,000 runs or something. The Shaina team will probably never fail, and you'll never see those 40-second runs either. It'll just be much more consistent. So I went for the average speed on my choice here, which is why we're running the double Talias. You see the 22-second one in the background. The 20.67 seconds was the best run, obviously, when everything goes correctly. But you can use either of those two teams. In terms of speed tuning, we're not going to switch the runes and demo the Shaina team on this video just because I burned like 25 million mana testing for this team. I really should have bought an FRR ticket. I didn't think it was going to be that expensive. And I have no mana left, so I'm not going to switch any more runes over, but I will show you how the Shaina should be speed tuned. Okay, so you guys can see that I am using the Talia lead, and that is because couldn't get her fat enough for Giants B10 with 100 crit rate, and that Giants B10 video is coming out next. So we did go with the Talia leader skill, so the Julie here is at 76% crit rate, 250 crit damage, 142 speed. Now, a really important point that I did not make in the first dungeon videos I did is that you only need 135 combat speed, which means 135 speed after speed towers, for your slowest monster in the Dragons B10 team. So realistically, Julie with a 103 base speed, she could be plus 17 speed, so 120, and she would act ahead of the boss. However, your Julie needs to act first, so she would actually have to be 122 speed. And here's why. We're using this Talia leader skill, which means the Talia would have to be 120 speed to act last, and then everybody else would have to be 121 speed so that they all acted speed-tuned as we wanted it. Now, when you ask why I'm getting that specific, because I actually did that at the 140. I struggled to get below 140. I don't have that many runes without speed, and I wound up with every monster at 140. I was actually gemming speed off of runes in order to get them down to this speed. So it was actually one thing that was kind of cool is when you have all the monsters the same speed, you can actually test them in different turn orders. So like when I wanted to test Rauk before Sabrina, all I had to do was rotate their spots like that, and Rauk went first. And it definitely does work much smoother when Sabrina goes first. With the Rauk going first, it has the potential to be faster more often, but it also has the potential to fail. I think I failed like 2 runs out of 15 with the Rauk acting first. So anyway, with the speed tuning discussed, here is the Julie. You'll notice she has no defense, she has no HP, she has no stats except for attack, crit rate, and crit damage. Now the other thing you'll notice is the 23 accuracy. This wasn't so much by design because I was really stretched tight to get enough damage on her. But I did have like 2 or 3 builds to choose from, so I went with the one that had the most accuracy. The reason for that is because her skill 1 does have a small chance to strip, so it's just one more level of derp protection on the end boss. If Sabrina doesn't land the defense break and the boss gets immunity up, then if your Julie, and lots of ifs here, right? But it's just a little bit of derp protection. If your Julie goes with skill 1, if it activates on that 50% chance, and if she passes the resistance check, then she strips the will off, and you're able to re-defense break the boss. Now, the Talia, I've got one Talia that's actually in triple fight. This was definitely the best triple fight set that I could build. And then the other Talia down here is going to be in rage fight. Now, my Talias both act last. I'm just showing them because they're my primary damage dealers. The other thing I want to show you is this Talia is at 61 crit rate. Now, again, we're running a Talia leader skill. That's plus 24. And we have 15% crit rate bonus on the end boss and the mid boss, which are the only monsters that Talia is hitting, and that's plus 15. So with that 39% crit rate boost, I've actually got 100 crit rate on this Talia. I have much stronger rage sets available, but I couldn't build one slow enough to get her to act after Julie. So this is the build that we came up with. Unfortunately, I couldn't use my stronger sets because of speed tuning. So that's something to keep in mind also when you're building your Julie. The faster you can make her, the easier it is. And again, we're talking about endgame runes here. So for most endgame players, you're going to struggle to build slow monsters. So the faster you can make your Julie where she's still able to one-shot the waves, the easier it is to build the supporting cast around her. This Talia actually acts ahead of the other Talia, and the reason for that is because this Talia does more damage. Even though she's not in the greatest build, she's still slightly stronger overall, so I wanted the weaker Talia to go first, hopefully to bring the boss below 50, if not below 30%, so that when the stronger Talia goes, she can clear the boss. Now this is the Sabrina. She's also in triple fight. She should have, if there's no Shaina on the team, she should have 54% accuracy. She's got 50%, but we're gonna talk about Rauk in a moment, but you'll notice he's using accuracy runes, so actually my Sabrina has 60% accuracy, which means she does have enough. The Julie also has 33% accuracy because of the accuracy runes from the Rauk. Now, one other interesting thing about Sabrina, I ran out of attack percent slot 2 runes, so I wound up having to use a speed rune. I ran out of fight slot 2 attack percent rune, so I wound up having to use a speed rune. I was fortunate that this rune wasn't already maxed. It was only at plus 12, so obviously I left it there, and then I had to gem speed off of almost every other rune to get her slow enough. Now, after Sabrina is the Rauk. The Rauk is in, as I mentioned, rage accuracy. He does not get attribute advantage against the boss, but he is over 76 crit rate, so he's effectively 100%. He does only have 36% accuracy with the accuracy runes, which is not enough to really benefit from his skill 1 scratch. but in this case I went for the overall damage as opposed to the extra accuracy. So those are the monsters. Now when we talk about turn order and the reason that each monster acts in this turn. So Julie goes first. Obviously she clears the waves. On the mid boss, she's going to do one hit, which is necessary for her to cycle her cooldown, and because she's going first. Then Sabrina acts second. Now Sabrina, we are counting on to do our defense break. Not 100% activation, but she's got a chance to defense break the boss. If she goes with her skill 1, she also has a chance to defense break the boss, but again, not 100% activation. So this is where the RNG comes into play. Because even if it may not even be a matter of accuracy and resist, it may just be a matter of not activating. So we go with Sabrina first for our first chance to defense break. Now we go with Rauk second. If he goes with his skill 1, he's got an 80% chance to defense break. Or if he teams up, then he's going to draw, hopefully, your Sabrina with him because she just went. And then that gives you yet another chance to defense break. After the Rauk is going to be the 2 Talias, each of whom brings Sabrina with them. So overall, we have 4 chances to defense break. However, if we haven't defense broken by the time we get to the Talias, we're probably not going to clear. So realistically, it's just the Sabrina and the Rauk turns that we have to defense break on one of those 2. Now, one of the limitations that I faced when building this team is because I went with the 76% crit rate build instead of 100, I am forced to use a 24% crit rate lead. So that basically means Talia, because there is no other crit rate lead that is going to make sense in this team. Like, you're not going to use a Pungbek or something like that. You're not going to use a Theomars, really. He's got a slow animation, doesn't do enough damage. Once you're forced to use Talia, you are then forced to use Sabrina. So basically, the Sabrina, the Talia, and the Julie are all forced into this team, so you have a lot less flexibility in your team composition. For the final 2 spots, I tried things like Double Lin, I tried Crow, I tried other various water nukers, but nothing has a smart enough AI to create consistency, and on top of that, you're basically always relying on Sabrina to defense break, and because she doesn't have 100% activation rate, a lot of those teams are going to fail at a high rate. So eventually that led me to putting in Shaina and Rauk. Shaina overall is going to be much more reliable on the defense break. And then it just sets everything up so that the Talia is got a much better chance to wipe the boss, or if not, the Talia overall is going to be doing more damage. The downsides to this are that you are almost always going to need all 5 monsters on the mid-boss, so that does cost you a couple of seconds a run, and then you're oftentimes still not going to have enough damage to finish off the boss, because if he's not under 50%, then Talia doesn't get her damage bonus on this skill. And so what happens is it creates kind of like a lower ceiling. Like this team in front of us basically maxed out at about 20, I think it was 23 or 24 seconds. It was much more consistent. It was like 24 to 31 every run. There were never bad runs or derps, but the overall average then was somewhere in the 27, 28 second range. So then I tried going with Shaina, Sabrina, and double Talias, but the Talia AI is really not very smart. It's actually one of the worst AIs, I think, out there. And so once again, there were a lot of issues with derping. In this case, what was happening is they were derping on the mid-boss. If both Talias go with skill 1 and don't attack buff in this particular team, the mid-boss actually survives. And so my Julie was getting wiped on the mid-boss, and it was causing fails. So ultimately, I wound up settling on this team, which, as we discussed, it ranges from 20 and 31 seconds. And then 2 or 3 times out of every 100 runs, you have like an awful, just completely derp-ridden run that runs out a little bit over 40 seconds. Now, I just want to show you guys right here, we have a total of 7 fight sets, which is 1 on Julie and the 2 on the sides, and we were able to clear. Now in this team, we have a total of 3 fight sets. There's 2 on the Lauren and then 1 on the Julie. And you'll see that we were able to clear. So basically, I do need 3 fight sets in this build to clear DB10, but I don't need more than that. And I'm making this point now just so when we look in the optimizer, you guys will see why I'm actually programming the numbers a little lower than my current Julie is. Now there is one final thing I need to point out before we go into the optimizer to do the build, and that is the skill ups. So my Julie is obviously all max skilled, but the one that truly matters is the 1,000 shots. Your 1,000 shots must be skilled up in order to turn cycle properly. Okay, so we are here in the Summoner's War Optimizer. By the way, I get asked this a lot in comments, by the way, so if you're not familiar with the optimizer, I'm going to put a link on how to install it on the screen right now. This is a program that was created by Xandro. So we've got our Julie loaded in the optimizer. We've put that we want her on a rage set, attack, crit damage, attack. Now I've put in 3 fight sets right here, and I've marked it to 76% crit. For the focus, we're going to put attack, crit rate, crit damage, and accuracy, and I use a pretty high search depth. I've got it at 60, but that's going to be based on your computer's power, so you'll just set that number. The higher you can set it, the more build options you get, but the higher you set it, the longer it takes to run the search. Just keep in mind that when you run with broken sets as a possible search parameter, you need to lower this search depth or you'll be waiting for a very long time for the search to come back. Okay, now we're going to come down to this little settings cog over here. Actually, first I should mention we click this plus 15 right here. Then we come to this little settings cog over here. We're going to load in 1,000 shots. Now I want to show you guys when you load in the 1,000 shots, the default multiplier is 120%. However, she does 6 hits, so we're going to change that to 720, which is the total of the 6 hits. And then the enemy's defense we're putting in at 1204. Now the reason we're putting that in is because that's, according to the Summoner's War wiki, that is the highest defense of any enemy monster on any wave. Now the monster that has 1204 defense, again according to the Summoner's War wiki, is 18,270 HP. We also put in our guild skill of Kairos Dungeon, and we marked to use buildings, and we marked that it was going to be a guaranteed crit rate. We did not put in any leader skill right now. So we go ahead and hit apply. You can stop the calculation for right now, and we're going to load in how many fight sets we have. At 4 sets, we're at 18,309, which means that I still might not clear every single wave 100% of the time. Once we come out and put in that 5th fight set at 18,647, now we're comfortably over that 18,270 HP level of the enemy monsters. We're enough over that I should clear the waves 100% of the time. We know that in the damage area, we're going to go ahead and just put in 18,500. That clears the bar for us comfortably. And we put in 76 crit rate, assuming you're using a Talia lead. Now, if you wanted to use, let's say, a Shaina lead or an Abigail lead, you would need 100% crit rate. But in here, you'd be able to put in your leader skill. We also want to make sure that we have our skill ups maxed, which is a 15% damage bonus. As I mentioned earlier, I would recommend trying to take one of the faster builds, but I would also make sure that I took one that had more accuracy. So you see these top builds for me, they're 138, 128, and so on. And then I've got a build at 144. So I could come up here and I could put 140 as a minimum speed and hit apply. Then I see some decent accuracy builds over there, so I could come here and put 23 accuracy and apply. And then you see this top build up here, the Rage Fight, is actually the build that I'm in right now. So using the same calculation, if you have no options for your Fat Julie, then the next team that you might try to build is that, we'll call her Overweight Julie. And the Overweight Julie is going to take the enemy monsters down below 30% health, but not completely kill them. And so remember, the enemy monsters have 18,270 HP, so 70% of that is 12,879, but we do have that little bit of randomness in there, so we probably want to go for somewhere around 13,400 just to be safe. Now again, you have the choice of going, in this case, a lot of people may actually choose to go with the 100% crit rate, so that they can use the Shaina leader skill. But that would, of course, be up to you. You could use the Talia leader skill either way. So if we went with that 100% crit rate, now we come in here and we drop in the Shaina leader skill. Everything else is going to stay the same. We hit apply, and then we get all of our different builds. Now keep in mind, I'm also right now set on 5 fight sets. And you can set this with however many fight sets you're going to use. So what I would actually recommend is, once you've confirmed that you can build an Overweight Julie, don't build her right away. From that point, go ahead and build out your other monsters and figure out if you're using any fight sets. Because for the Overweight Julie, generally speaking, and keeping in mind that you don't need speed, you don't need tons of other stats, most players by late mid-game stages, most players should be able to build this. So you may not need to use any fight sets because we're going for a much lower damage threshold, but if you do need fight sets, you want to build your other monsters out first so that you know how many fight sets to put in this calculation. Now, as far as what the Overweight Julie team actually looks like, it's going to look like this. You'll see this is going to be my second Shaina, so she's not skilled up. We pulled a Rune off to make sure she'd be at 140 speed. I also pulled a Rune off the Julie. So the speed tuning is all correct right here in order to demonstrate the team. So the Julie is going to go first. She's going to lower the waves but not completely clear them. The Shaina is going to go second and clear the wave because the Julie will have lowered the monsters below 30%. Now when we get to the mid-boss, the Julie goes first, just does a fluff hit, the Shaina defense breaks, then the Sabrina goes, then the Lin is going to go. The Lin right here, this one's in Rage. Now in this particular version of the team, I actually recommend you build Lin in Violent. It's a level of derp protection so that because Lin does derp a lot, if she derps, then you've got a chance for her to go again and use her skill 3. And then the Talia right here is also in Rage. Now you do usually want your Talia in Rage, but you could put her in Violent for derp protection. Okay, so yep, the Julie was able to get the Shaina AI to trigger, so we cleared the wave. Now that should run exactly like that every time. We get the reliable defense break from Shaina. Lin clears the mid-boss, which makes it run a little bit quicker. The Julie did get enough crits, so we're able to clear that wave again. And now, once again, the missed defense break there, the Shaina went, but now the Lin derped as well, so the damage is very low. Keep in mind, if I wasn't missing runes, I would have at least had the boss lower than that. So when you're running this type of team, I would recommend having runes on all of your monsters. But even so, you get the idea of how it runs. We went 34 seconds. This particular team, for me, ran 25 to 37 seconds with an overall average of about 31. Number one question I got in the comments on the original DB10 video is Julie necessary and must she be skilled up? So the answer to both of those questions for this particular team is yes. Julie is necessary to run an Overweight Julie team. The Julie is what allows you to trigger that Shaina AI to be 100%. Now, after this, we're going to talk about another team without Julie. But while we're focusing on this team, you do have to have the Julie. You also have to have the Shaina. D.Va is not a replacement for Shaina because you need to be able to defense break the mid-boss and the end-boss. So Julie can manipulate D.Va's AI the same way she manipulates Shaina's. And D.Va will actually clear the waves for you the same way Shaina does. But what D.Va will not do is defense break the mid-boss and the end-boss, and without those defense breaks, you're not going to clear the wave. You can maybe run a Martina. I think Martina might be your next best bet because Martina will steal the immunity from the Dragon Boss. So if you have Martina, that's probably a good Sabrina replacement. Other than Martina, I don't think any of the other boomerangs are really gonna serve that role as well as Sabrina does. The Talia you could probably get away without if you use something like a Rauk or a Lin or maybe even a Brandia. You're just going to be dealing with more derps and potentially more slow runs, and the more derps you're likely to have, the tankier your monsters have to be. So keep in mind that if you have a team that's going to derp a lot, make sure to put on some extra HP and defense because the fight's going to go on longer. Now, as far as the Lin, Lin again is a monster that's not absolutely necessary. You could put in any other big nuker. She fills the role the best because when Lin does derp, her skills 1 and 2 also hit really hard because they scale on enemy max HP. If you don't have Lin, monsters like Sigmarus, monsters like Crow, monsters like Brandia, any of them will fill that role. So this is kind of the alternative team, and you can see it's extremely similar that you can use if you don't have a fat Julie. There's a couple of alternatives in this team. It's a little bit more flexible than the others, but let's start with the Theory Craft. So in this team, your Shaina is your fastest monster as well as your leader. And your Shaina is going to hopefully not derp and do her Chakram Crush on the AoE. As long as Shaina does not derp, your Rauk is going to go second either way. And as long as Shaina does not derp, Rauk will clear that wave because of his passive. The passive that if you kill an enemy, you gain another turn instantly. Rauk is going to be able to hit the mid-boss hard in several different ways. He can either use a team-up and bring a Water Twin, Shaina, Lin, whatever, or he can go on a scratch streak. Either way, he's going to do a ton of damage to the boss. Now, your Sabrina is actually the monster that's going to act third here. Your Lin is going to act fourth. And basically what we're doing here is the Sabrina is a third level of defense break. If somehow both Shaina and Rauk got resisted, Sabrina gives us yet another chance to defense break. She's also going to do some damage, and she's usually going to bring the Talia with her, so she's going to do big damage. Not enough to clear the boss, but big damage. Now the Lin goes fourth, and the Lin will usually clear the boss if your runes are strong enough, but if you're in like the earlier stages of mid-game, the Lin may not clear the boss, but she'll bring them, and we're talking mid-boss here, she'll bring the mid-boss below 50%, enough for the Talia to finish the mid-boss. Then when you get to the next wave, it's the same thing. Shaina's going to go. Hopefully she's going to use her Chakram Crush. Ralph will clear the wave. Now, we go with the Lin fourth for the same reason we did on the other team, which is that when we get to the final boss, we want to make sure that we've got our best chance to have him below 50% so that Talia can wipe him out. If you don't have Lin, all the same alternatives apply, except they're actually less of a downgrade on this team than they were on the other team. On the other team, it was a bigger deal. Here, you could use a lot of different things. You could use Sigmarus, you could use Crow, you could use any big water-based nuker. You could also use a Vertihile as your lead and get that extra 28% speed lead. But basically, any kind of monster that's either going to give you a nuke or some sort of benefit to your overall team. So in the case of Verti, he's going to allow you to attack boost or attack bar boost and get back ahead of in front of the boss before it gets immunity up. Any of those types of things would work. Now, if you're using the Verti, he would act last, as I mentioned, after the Talia. If you're using any other nuker, then they're going to act before the Talia. If you don't have Sabrina, as I mentioned, you do need, in order to use the Shaina, well, you can use Shaina no matter what, but in order to get best use out of Shaina, you do need to usually have a boomerang, so Martina is going to be your next best option. You could get away with Maruna, though. In this case, the Maruna is going to give you an AoE. She'll bring this Shaina with her, so now you've got 2 AoE chances. If you were using Maruna, I would actually have Maruna going second, so that you've got 2 chances to do an AoE skill and defense break everybody before the route goes. So your team would look something like this, where you're running Shaina, then Maruna, and then Rout, and then Lin, and then Talia. If you don't have the Talia, she's again replaceable with any big water-based nuker. You could even do something like this, where you've got the Shaina, the Maruna, and then if you happen to have 2 Lins, you could run 2 Lins. You could run Taeor, you could run Sigmarus. Again, anything that's just going to do big damage. The best damage dealers for the Kairos dungeons are ones that have multiple skills that scale to the enemy's max HP. Barring that, then you're just looking for anything that's got a huge multiplier. So for example, if you happen to have Brandia, not only does she have a huge multiplier, but her damage is boosted additionally whenever the enemy that she hits is immune to inability effect. But basically, the whole concept of this team is to get an AoE defense break and then use Rauk to clear the waves because of his turn cycling, to defense break, and then just nuke out the mid boss and the end boss. Now, the rune requirements on this team are going to tend to be much lower, but I do strongly recommend that you put as much Violent in this team as you can. I'm going to go ahead and reload this team one more time. We'll finish on that note. A lot of these monsters, as you saw, are not currently runed for me because I was shifting runes around to build this original team. So I can't quite demo this team, but I will leave it on screen at least in the turn order that they would go in. So again, the concept of this team is you defense break the wave. The Rauk is then going to clear the wave for you. For the mid-boss, we've got 3 different chances to defense break and then 2 big nukers. And then putting these monsters, you want to put the Shaina, the Rauk, and the Sabrina, and the Lin. So you want to put the first 4 monsters all on Violent because that increases your odds of getting those AoE attacks. And it also is obviously going to increase your damage a little bit. And then the Talia, I would go with Rage. Okay, so that is it for today's updated Dragons B10 video, guys. As always, really hope you found it helpful. Hope you enjoyed it. And I appreciate you watching. And we'll see you next time. Hey guys, if you're still with me to this point, then that means that you probably liked the video, found it entertaining, or even better, both. So please smash the like button, hit the subscribe button, and leave a comment down below because those things help the channel grow, and more importantly, they show me that the video is useful, and that's the whole reason I do this in the first place.